I'd like to welcome our viewers to the second installment of the show Recovery Today. This show is addressing all aspects that are related to recovery from addiction. And I would like to mention that although the viewers are getting a show with our guests coming from the Salisbury area on the eastern shore of Maryland, the issues that we address in our show pertain to all aspects of recovery that can be as pertinent in Alaska or over in England as they are here on the eastern shore of Maryland. So we welcome our viewers to our show. My name is John Winslow. I'm your host. I am with the Board of Directors of the Salisbury's Recovery Resource Center. I happen to also be with the Maryland chapter of the National Council on Alcoholism and Drug Dependence. And furthermore, I need to mention that I also am a person in long-term recovery, which for me means that I haven't had a drink or a drug in over 41 years now on a continuous basis. So I need to say that to show our viewers that recovery certainly does work. We address a wide range of topics regarding addiction treatment, recovery, prevention, and today we're going to be talking about drug courts. And no better person that can help us understand what drug courts are about and how they function, particularly here on the Eastern Shore, than my guest today, Judge Kathleen Beckstead. So welcome, Judge. Good to have you on our show today. I'm thrilled to have you here.
Thanks for having me, John. It's great to be here.
So I would like to begin in introducing our topic by mentioning that there was an article that was published by Susan Parker that came out in April regarding recovery efforts here on the shore. And she was capturing some multi-generational recovery efforts and featured myself, somebody that's been in recovery for many years, and also was highlighting a young man that was in an earlier stage of recovery. This young man happened to be a participant in your drug court in Wicomico County. And from that and conversations that you and I have had led an invitation from you for me to join in the celebration of the graduation ceremony that you had recently with your drug court participants. And I've got to say that it was just a wonderful experience. I was really pleased to be a part of that, to see the joy, to see it was a real celebration of accomplishment and if you will, a launching pad for folks to further step out upon their graduation from drug court into their ongoing journey into recovery. So I thank you and the Wicomico County Drug Court for your efforts and the significant role that you folks play in those folks in their journey into recovery. So
thank you for coming, and everyone's invited. We'll have another one this fall, and it's open to the public. So everyone's welcome to come and get as excited as we do about seeing people recover. Yeah.
Right. So let's learn about drug courts. So let me just ask for you to give an introduction to what are drug courts.
So in Wicomico County, our drug court is an alternative to jail. Not all drug courts operate that way, but they all have some things in common. And the first and foremost is that it's a leveraged recovery. In other words, there are pending charges. Sometimes there's a pending sentencing, or in this case, you'll be sentenced into drug court to avoid jail. They are judicially supervised so that it's like super probation. And you are before a judge frequently, in our case, a minimum of every other week. And the whole purpose of that is to focus on treatment. Because what we know is if you're successful in treatment, then you're going to reduce the likelihood that somebody's going to repeat a crime. And the folks that come into drug court are there because they have an addiction or a substance dependence that has caused them to offend. So we focus on treatment, yeah.
So somebody's going to be sitting back for those that have been arrested and saying, well, you're going to go to drug court and you don't have an addictions problem, you don't go to drug court, or is it a mandatory?
It is. That's a really good question. What happens is, first of all, you have to be willing to entertain drug court. If you're not, then you're going to be treated as any other person going through the criminal justice system. You will be clinically evaluated at your request to determine whether you qualify for drug court. And the Wicomico County Health Department does that for us. Mm-hmm. In order to qualify, you have to meet a level of need of intensive outpatient treatment. So if you haven't reached that need, then you're not going to be deemed appropriate for drug court. And if you are in need of a higher level of care, it presents some challenges for drug court. We do take people who need a higher level of care, but first they have to go either to a short-term inpatient treatment or sometimes a long-term inpatient treatment. And how we get that done before sentencing is one of the challenges we'll talk about later. But the vast majority of people who come in meet the IOP level of clinical need for substance abuse treatment.
And IOP is what?
Intensive outpatient treatment.
Okay.
And so yes, there is a determination of clinical eligibility that is made by an independent third party. And once, even before that, we have to determine if they are legally eligible. So in drug courts across the state, legal eligibility is different. In our case, you must be a non-violent offender, which means that you may not have certain prior convictions that would prohibit you from coming into drug court. You also must be a resident in Wicomico County. You must be an adult, so we don't have a juvenile drug court in Wicomico County at this point in time. And you must be facing active incarceration of a minimum of 1 year. So this is really for the higher risk, higher need folks in terms of who is appropriate. And the reason that's true, John, is because the leverage turns out to be very important. The program is quite demanding. Someone has to decide they're going to change their whole life. They're going to have to change their whole life, which means in our program that they're going to have to be in recovery in continuous treatment for 24 months. The program is 15 to 24 months, so it could be shorter, but practically speaking, it's usually not. They're going to have to be willing to get a full-time job and hold that job for 20 consecutive weeks before they can graduate. Mm-hmm. They're going to have 190 days of consecutive clean time. And what that means in our program is that you can't miss a urine. Mm-hmm. You might be, clean and sober, but you have to demonstrate that. So it's a big accountability.
So when you say miss a urine, this is urine drug testing?
Yes.
That to ensure that somebody is not, you're not just taking their word for it when they say, I've not used.
Correct. That's a big part of the supervision component, and I'll talk a little bit about that too. But from the recovery perspective, we work with our area treatment providers. So the health department's a big provider of care, but also J. David Collins and White Flint Recovery and Peninsula Addiction and Eastern Shore Psychological. Okay. Mm-hmm. We have memorandums of understanding with them. Mm-hmm. And they provide treatment, and at treatment you are tested. Your urines are tested. Mm-hmm. You are also in some cases required to wear a SCRAM, which is a transdermal alcohol detection unit, which is like an ankle bracelet. Yes. Mm-hmm. For those people who are using alcohol or abusing alcohol, to make sure that they're alcohol free, because it just dissipates very quickly. And
so it might pick up otherwise, the urine drug testing might pick up other drugs, heroin, for instance, or opiate, but not necessarily the alcohol. So the SCRAM patches for somebody, especially somebody that may be suspected or known to have an alcohol dependence use disorder.
Correct. And so multiple DUI offenders are common. Sure. Folks will understand these are folks that can be eligible for drug court. So it can be alcohol, but sometimes people substitute. So if you are in the practice of having, a substance to bring you into a level of comfort, and you're not allowed to use that substance, you can substitute that with alcohol. And so even those who are not considered alcohol abusers, they may resort to alcohol. So we We don't use that commonly unless we know that there's that risk. But if your substance of choice was alcohol, then we have scram as well. And I mentioned that because you said urines, and so they're tested at parole and probation, they're tested at treatment, and they're tested at the detention center as part of our program, random and observed.
Now, my understanding is that with this testing to determine whether or not somebody that's a participant in drug court may have ingested or brought substances into their system in some fashion or another is not with a purpose of gotcha so much as it is used as a leverage preventatively so that they know that if they're going to be tested randomly and frequently, that's going to serve as a deterrent for them trying to get away with anything.
Right.
And if they do use, then it's the goal is to get them back on track as rapidly as possible. Is that correct? Not to play gotcha and now we're going to punish you.
Well, it kind of depends on when a new use occurs, how we treat the new use. The whole purpose of drug court is to empower them to change and to recover. That is the entire purpose. And so let me jump ahead a little bit and talk about the treatment providers and the folks taking those urines report back to me. They are clean. They've been clean for the last week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. We see them every 2 weeks at a minimum for the early part of their participation, sometimes more often, and they get rewarded for that.
For having a negative drug test result.
Negative drug test, attending treatment, participating actively in their treatment program. So we encourage them when they're doing well. And that's actually considered to be, by the research, more effective by far than any kind of sanctioning that may occur.
You mentioned the team, and let me just, before we get into the team, I want to let our viewers know that you are watching Recovery Today show. My guest today is the Honorable Judge Kathleen Beckstead, and we are talking about drug courts on the Eastern Shore. So following up with the discussion about the team, what kind of team are we talking about?
Okay. Well, this team is the drug court team that meets every Friday, where we hold drug court every Friday, and it consists of all of the treatment providers, because it's drug treatment court, so they actually physically come to our staffing before court and personally tell me how everyone's doing.
So a counselor from one of those agencies that you had mentioned, including the health department, would come and attend your team meeting?
Right. And the state's attorney, the public defender, the Department of Corrections, because they do urine and they also monitor our community service and work programs, are present. We have law enforcement present. They are our eyes and ears in the community, and they can let us know if somebody's engaged in risky behavior. I am present for that, and we all meet together. And the beauty of that, John, is that everyone gets to hear what they would not normally hear. The treatment provider would not normally hear from parole and probation, who's also present at the table. How are they doing on probation? How are they doing in the community? What concerns do we have? It's very helpful for the treatment provider to hear all that information. It's also essential for me to have treatment explained to me, because I am not trained as a treatment counselor, what it is that I'm seeing from the participant. And sometimes I won't appreciate the major changes that they're making in their life without hearing from the treatment provider. So sometimes if it's not clear to me that this is, all things are going as well as I might think they should, the treatment provider will say, this is wonderful progress from this person, and they need to be recognized for their progress. All of those people discuss how we recognize the individuals, if we withhold any positive reinforcement, or if necessary, if there's going to be a sanction. They're there for the open discussion. That only happens in a problem-solving court. That never happens in normal court. You know?
When you mention sanctions, could you give an example of what a sanction may be? And I take it that with those sanctions, that as you talk about the the duration of a participant's exposure and involvement in drug court, that from the beginning to the end, we're not talking about just a steady line of progress that we expect them to be making prior to their final graduation.
So sure. So sanctions at the outset, we want to try to recognize what things they have control over, and then some things they may not have control over. So don't want to be sanctioning somebody for something they don't have a lot of control over. And for sanctions, we sometimes withhold applause, or we'll require that they do a letter of reflection, an essay. We may require that they have increased accountability through daily sign-ins so that they get in the practice of being consistent. They could be required to calendar and show treatment team and others their calendar so we know how they're spending their time. We can place them on electronic monitoring. If necessary, we can incarcerate them. And sometimes that happens as a sanction. If it was well within your control and we feel that this is, you're now engaged in a change of thought process that is becoming a threat to your recovery, you may spend some time in jail to reflect on whether you want to go the other direction or not.
Speaking of that, my understanding with drug court as opposed to traditional court is that drug court can provide instant positive responses,
Right. Yes.
positive rewards as well as negative consequences. That you know that the nature of addiction is instant gratification, and those of us that have been in an active addiction, we sometimes, with the criminal justice system, if you get arrested in June and you don't come to trial for another 7 months, and it's hard to connect the dots, as opposed to drug court can instantaneously, if somebody has, for instance, shown up with a negative urine or a positive urine screen, that they could get some immediate negative consequences. Weekend in jail as an example, perhaps?
Sure. So we wouldn't normally do that for their first positive because we recognize that they're at risk for relapse early on. But sure, absolutely. And it happens right away, and then we can move on. And you get it behind you, and you can start recovery. And you continue in your recovery, and we just recognize that was a stumble, and we're moving forward. Sure. And also the positive reinforcement, John, gives them that gratification, when you are getting rewarded in your use by, that feel good. This is a feel good. I mean, we clap, we praise. It's
not
fun.
Something that you traditionally would see in a regular court, correct?
No, everybody come to see what it's like. It's inspirational for me to be able to reward somebody for doing well, and I think people feel the goodwill that we have toward them.
And I have been there, and I have seen that at work, and it is just a wonderful experience. And to see family members that are involved as well. So with this drug court thing that is happening here on the Eastern Shore, and you sitting in a courtroom as the judge addressing working with this team and addressing this participant and helping change the course. Did you, as a teen, say, "Hey, I think I want to be a drug court judge"? And
no.
How did this happen?
I didn't think I wanted to be a judge. So as a teen, I'm lucky that I made it through law school. So what I would tell you, though, is that I became a judge in 2000. And we created drug court not in response to the opiate epidemic, but drug court was developed back in our county back in 2004. It was not new at that time. I think drug courts began in like 1989. So it was new to Wicomico County. I was asked to be involved, and I was very skeptical. My entire toolbox consisted of jail or probation. And I didn't know that it was going to be a good fit to try to superimpose kind of what I perceived as being kind of a social worker role for me. And then when we went to national training and I went down to New Iberia, Louisiana, I saw my first really functional drug court that made me light up inside.
You went, wow.
That's what I want, and I brought it back. And that's what we have. So I stole New Iberia's program.
So tell me about some of the challenges that you've had, and tell me about some of the successes that are that you're mindful of.
First and foremost, we are saving lives in drug court. And so probably the most immediate challenge that I've experienced is our very first loss of someone who didn't survive. And so it just strengthens our resolve to continue this work. We would like to grow the capacity of drug court, and so things need to change a little bit in order for us to do that.
How many participants do you have now?
50, but at any given time, I don't know that we have exactly 50, but that's our capacity. At any given time, we are having people come and go. Over the years, we've had 91 graduates since we opened our drug court in 2005. And I would love to be able to say that that was all the 800 people or 900 people who applied. Really only a fraction of the people can come in for the reasons we talked about, legal and clinical screens. But I have to believe, John, that there are more people who are eligible for drug court that aren't coming in that should be. So I want to grow the drug court, and so this is part of our outreach to let people know about it. It's easier to do jail time. You don't have to change your whole life to go to jail, but it's worth it to recover and to see your families come back together and to make healing and be responsible, pay your taxes, get a job. This is all great stuff, and people want it. It's just intimidating when you're in addiction and you feel like you can't get, over that hurdle. So it can happen in drug court, and it is happening. So you saw our 9 graduates.
Right.
And they demonstrate that it works.
And they gave their personal testimony to the value of drug court and how it not only changed their lives, some people were saying that it saved their life and gave them a life worth saving, is what I was hearing as well. So for those viewers that are watching our show today that are, that are thinking, well, maybe this is something that could work for my loved one, or I have somebody, or I have a role in a community that could maybe help support or get some, how did somebody get into drug court? Or how can somebody watching the show help support our efforts here?
Okay, so Lindsay Taman is our drug court coordinator, and I may not have mentioned that on the drug court team we have a drug court coordinator and a resource manager who helps with all those life issues that they have. But you can reach them. Her number is 410-334-3193. She will answer all of your questions.
We will post those numbers.
And also, your attorney will know about what the Wicomico County Drug Treatment Program. All you need to do is ask. We have all the literature available at the courthouse. You're welcome to stop by. The attorneys have it in their possession. And even the state's attorney is on our team and is willing to recommend people to come into drug court if they're appropriate for the program.
So a very interesting mix with state's attorney, the public defender's office, and all working together on the same page to help support somebody's recovery.
It's non-adversarial. We're all there.
Imagine that.
Yeah, it is a wonderful new feeling.
But before we wrap up for today with our show, is there any primary pieces left unsaid that you are really standing out for you that you want to make sure that our viewers are knowledgeable of?
One thing, you don't have to wait for criminal charges to find recovery. We have the Recovery Resource Center, and I want to say that if you have a family member who is having difficulty with substances, there is help, there's hope, and it's free at the Recovery Resource Center. You don't have to be yourself having a problem with substances to help someone else. There's Al-Anon and there's Nar-Anon. Those are for family members of people who are in substance use. Check it out. If you don't know if you have a problem, come to a self-help meeting and find out. It will answer your questions and give you resources. So I would just say that we have these things that we can offer in drug court, but you don't have to wait in addiction. to get the help that you need, and you can spare yourself a lot of trouble.
Judge Beckstead, thank you so much for coming on today, being our guest on our show. There is some information, in addition to the phone number that you had mentioned, we have some websites and there's a PowerPoint presentation that we may be able to find a way to connect our viewers with, so for some further detailed information about drug courts that you had passed on to me. So I would encourage our viewers that have watched our show today to tell your friends and let them know that PAC 14 has this Recovery Today show. It can also be found on YouTube. Our next taping is going to be in October, and so we would invite you to stay tuned and look for our next taping of our Recovery Today show. The information again about our show, about the Recovery Resource Center that you had mentioned, is going to be posted on the show as well. And we would ask that you check out our Facebook page and like us on Facebook. And so, Judge Beckstead, thank you so much for coming in today and being our guest.
Thanks for having me.
And we thank our viewers for tuning in to Recovery Today. My name is John Winslow, the host for our show Recovery Today. Please join us next time.